Yeah, you know who it is, and for those of you that don't, I'm Cytonius, the opposite of the phoniest! And
I'm Batman.
For an entire generation, this was by far the most culturally defining two words ever spoken in film. In 1989, the world changed. In that year, the rap group 2 Live Crew would release their third album, As Nasty as They Wanna Be, to nationwide outrage and controversy. In the world of animation, Krusty the Clown would make his television debut on the third season of The Tracy Ullman Show, which would later spin off into another TV show, The Simpsons. In the world of politics, we would see the fall of the Berlin Wall, and on June 23, 1989, we would get the game-changing film, Batman. Created in 1939 by Bill Finger and Bob Kane, Batman was created in response to the popularity of characters like Superman, Zorro, and the Phantom. While it might seem hard to believe now, there was a point in time where no one wanted to make a Batman movie. While the character had appeared in film serials throughout the 40s, the most culturally significant Batman project outside of the comics after that would be It might not seem like it now, but the 1966 Adam West and Burt Ward Batman television series is one of the most important pieces of Batman media. The series would be a love letter to Generation X youth-centered counterculture. It would also be a major factor in the perception of how Batman and other superheroes were perceived by the public. Because of this series, Batman would be perceived as a campy and quirky crime fighter who was more like an 11th grade high school hall monitor than a tortured, dangerous vigilante. The 1970s would be a turning point for Batman. After the cancellation of the Batman television series, the comics would focus on trying to get the character back to his dark urban vigilante roots, with creators like Steve Englehart, Denny O'Neil, and Neil Adams making some of the most engaging Batman comics of the Bronze Age. But the real definitive age for Batman would be the 80s. The 1980s would see groundbreaking stories like The Dark Knight Returns, Year One, Death in the Family, and Son of the Demon recalibrate the Batman comics from niche nerd literature to critically acclaimed comic book compositions. In the world of film, we would see a void of culturally significant superheroes, with movies like Howard the Duck, Superman 3 and 4, and Supergirl failing to meet audience and box office expectations. During the 80s, the mainstream perception of superheroes, especially Batman, was still tied to campy, cartoonish kiddie stuff. And one man was on a mission to change that. No, not him. Him.
Batman created just a universe that I could really believe in. And I always regretted that as my favorite character in comics, it had not ever quite been portrayed the way I thought that Bob Kane and company really intended it to be. And I really wanted to see that creature of the night emerge and let the world at large see that there is more to Batman than pow, zap, and wham. And for about 20 years, whenever anyone mentioned the word Batman or wrote about it in print, pow, zap, and wham were always attached to the name. I wanted to detach it and get back to the heart of the character.
While he might not be as well known for his impact on Batman as somebody like Bill Finger, Frank Miller, or Grant Morrison, Michael Uslan is probably one of the most important people involved in the Batman film franchise. Along with his producing partner, the late Benjamin Melnicker, Uslan would purchase the film rights to Batman in the late 70s and dedicate himself to producing the dark, definitive, and gritty Batman movie. While most film studios in the early 80s thought the idea of a Batman movie, or any superhero movie besides Superman, was a stupid idea, Uslan and Melnicker would develop other comic book properties for film, including the straight-to-VHS adaptation of the DC Comics character Swamp Thing in 1982. They would also create the legendary, innovative, and illustrious y'all don't know nothing about that, man. Moving on. While it might seem hard to believe now, considering how ubiquitous and popular the character is, the production and development of a Batman film in the 80s would face a lot of major obstacles. One of which being the fact that Batman wasn't popular in the early to mid-80s. Comic book titles like Uncanny X-Men, Daredevil, the new Teen Titans, along with indie comics like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, would be the dominant force in comic book shops during the early to mid-80s. During that time, it would have made more sense to make a film adaptation of DC's most popular comic book series, the new Teen Titans. Crisis on Infinite Earths would be one of the greatest comic books ever written, and would be one of the best things to ever happen to Batman in the 80s. While he wasn't a major character in the 12-issue miniseries written by Marv Wolfman and drawn by the late George Perez, Crisis on Infinite Earths, or rather the post-crisis era of Batman comics, would produce some of the most critically acclaimed and definitive stories of the Caped Crusader. In order for a Batman film to become not only a reality but a success, it would need several things: the right producer, the right writer, and the right director. Enter Tim Burton.
And I love the idea of a man who dresses up like a bat versus a man who's literally turned into a clown, you know. Two good characters there. The idea of being locked into a specific thing is almost impossible to do when you're doing a movie. So things like The Dark Knight and The Killing Joke are very good for the movie in the sense that they go back to the psychology, and yet they blow apart the conventions a bit and do, you know, their own thing. They're just smarter about it. So that's very good for I think what we're doing in the movie.
Tim Burton is probably the most important filmmaker to work on a Batman film, or any superhero film for that matter. Yes, even more than them. While Richard Donner's Superman was critically acclaimed in 1978, Tim Burton's Batman in 1989 legitimized superheroes in film and would open the floodgates for dark, comic book-based films of the 90s. Because of this film, we would get a dark and emotionally driven adaptation of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles that was more inspired by the dark and gritty Mirage comics than the kid-centric Saturday morning cartoon. We would also get films like 1994's The Crow and The Shadow, along with 1996's The Phantom, which were all a direct result of the success and the darkness of Batman. Early in the development of the film, directors like Joe Dante, who's best known for movies like The Gremlins, and the late great Ivan Reitman, who's best known for movies like Ghostbusters, were all involved in the pre-production of what would become Batman '89. Unfortunately, the version of Batman that those directors wanted to make was still more in line with the 1960s Adam West series. Hell, Ivan Reitman wanted to make the movie with Bill Murray as Batman and Eddie Murphy as Robin.
What? Are you kidding me?
Tim Burton would get hired in 1985 to direct the film and would develop the script with his girlfriend at the time, screenwriter Julie Hickson. They would rewrite the script after the movie's original screenwriter, Tom Mankiewicz's script, was considered too campy. Burton and Nixon's script focused on a plot from the Joker to run for mayor of Gotham City. That script would then be rewritten by Sam Hamm.
The project had been kicking around for quite a while and had been at Warner Brothers, and I think they had done a couple of scripts. They had talked about, all kinds of different approaches. They were going to do an Art Deco period Batman. They were going to do a comedy Batman. They were talking at one point, if I'm remembering properly, about Bill Murray as Batman and Eddie Murphy as Robin.
Sam Hamm's script would be the foundation of what Batman '89 would become, a sexy, psychologically driven comic book action movie. But even after several scripts that had been produced during the early to mid-'80s by a wide variety of writers, movie studios were still hesitant to greenlight a live-action Batman feature film. The major determining factor in getting a Tim Burton Batman movie made was a little-known film called Beetlejuice.
Oh, yeah, here I come, baby.
He's guaranteed to put some life
Attention, keyword shoppers.
in your afterlife. Michael Keaton is Beetlejuice.
I'm the ghost with the most, babe.
While Burton had directed several short films and a major box office movie hit with 1985's Pee-wee's Big Adventure, it would be 1988's Beetlejuice that would not only get Burton the job directing Batman, but it would also be the entry point and debut of his signature, quirky, gothic film sensibilities in a major studio film. The combination of Tim Burton's dark and gothic sensibilities and Sam Hamm's comic book influenced script would create a Batman film that would transcend public expectations and mainstream perceptions of superheroes and mass media. Tim Burton's Batman wasn't just a movie, it was a cultural event. With that being said, the question remains, is Batman 89 a good film? Nah. And that's okay, because I don't think that's the point of the movie. The purpose of the movie is to legitimize and recontextualize Batman for a mainstream audience, who, at the time, only saw the character as an avatar for lowbrow, low-art, campy comic book nonsense. While the story of the film is incohesive and many of the main characters are underwritten, mainly because the movie was filmed during the 1988 writer's strike, Batman isn't a movie built on character development. It's a movie built on thematic resonance. Thematically, the film is about the emotional and psychological polarity between Batman and the Joker. Batman represents cold and decisive order, whereas the Joker represents unhinged disorder. In fact, Batman and the Joker are avatars for two psychological profiles. Batman represents obsessive-compulsive disorder, while the Joker represents attention deficit disorder, with both conditions being a result of psychological trauma. The movie is very intentional with making them the source of each other's trauma.
You idiot! You made me, remember? You dropped me into that vat of chemicals. That wasn't easy to get over. Don't think that I didn't try.
I made you. You made me first.
Batman is portrayed by Michael Keaton. Born Michael John Douglas, he would change his last name to Keaton to avoid confusion with another well-known actor, Michael Douglas. Keaton would get his start in the industry working as a background crew member on the Mr. Rogers television series in the 70s. Known mostly for being a comedic actor, Keaton would be a controversial choice to play Batman and Bruce Wayne. Because of his previous work in comedy, many people thought that the movie was going to be a remake of the campy Adam West series. Keaton's casting would exist as the precursor to social media nerd outrage, with many people immediately opposed to Beetlejuice and Mr. Mom being cast as Batman. In my opinion, and based on the legacy of the film, Michael Keaton as Batman is an essential piece of why this movie works. And a major factor in why Michael Keaton works as Batman has to do with one character, John McClane. 1988's Die Hard is one of the most important and impactful films of all time. It was so impactful that it would be a major influence on Batman 89 without even knowing it. Batman and Die Hard are two films that are built on subversion. 1988's Die Hard exists to subvert and legitimize the action movie genre. Before John McClane and before Die Hard, most action movies of the 80s focused on beefcake steroid-injected muscle men. Batman 89 exists to subvert and legitimize the superhero film genre. Before Batman 89, superhero films were considered corny and void of any type of realistic merit. The parallels don't stop there. Both Bruce Willis and Michael Keaton were actors best known for comedies who transitioned into subversive late 80s action movie stars. In the comics, Bruce Wayne is a wealthy, vapid playboy who uses those character traits to draw attention away from the possibility that he might be Batman. While more traditional leading men like Alec Baldwin,
why did you say that name?
And Mel Gibson,
why did you say that name?
Were considered for the role. For this version of Bruce Wayne to stand out as a unique and distinct interpretation of the character, he would need to be a subversion of the dry, self-assured, and suave Bruce Wayne portrayed by Adam West, and the handsome playboy version presented in the comics. Michael Keaton's Bruce Wayne exists as a neurotic, aloof, introspective, and average-looking guy who's more like an emo Woody Allen and less like James Bond. Tim Burton wasn't trying to make a faithful adaptation of Batman. He was trying to recontextualize him for the late 20th century, specifically for the Reagan era. So I'm not here to say that Tim Burton made a Batman film filled with right-wing Reagan propaganda. As far as I know, Tim Burton is a left-leaning, liberal, artsy, eccentric goth kid turned film director. In fact, much of Tim Burton's filmography is dedicated to criticizing and lampshading conservative societal norms from white America. But Batman '89 is different from anything Tim Burton has ever directed. It's the one Tim Burton movie driven by militarized heroism and 80s excess. Two things that are very much a byproduct of Ronald Reagan's America. While Tim Burton's Batman isn't a faithful adaptation of the mainline continuity comics of the time, the movie would be influenced by two major Batman comics of the 80s. 1986's The Dark Knight Returns would be a politically charged deconstruction of Batman. That version of Batman and Bruce Wayne would be far removed from the charming ladies' man beacon of justice crime fighter presented in previous comics, and would instead be a middle-aged schizophrenic vigilante. Burton and Keaton's Batman would draw inspiration from this and create what I think is the anti-Batman. Despite what grim and gritty fanboys think, Batman, along with many other superheroes, should be aspirational, hopeful, and heroic. While opinions may vary based on your level of exposure and familiarity to the character, a central part of the Batman canon is rooted in his pursuit of justice and not vengeance. Another important thing about Batman is that he doesn't kill. Tim Burton's interpretation of Batman violates this rule. This version of Batman is deeply cynical. In an attempt to make Batman a respectable pop culture mainstay of the late 80s, Tim Burton created a Batman that isn't heroic. This version of Batman is driven by vengeance and not by justice. By making the Joker the killer of Bruce Wayne's parents, it changes Batman's mission from justice to vengeance. At his best, Batman is an avatar for ideological standards of justice. In the most faithful adaptations of the character, Batman is an avatar for rehabilitative justice. For those that don't know, rehabilitative justice is a social philosophy that focuses on criminal reform and behavioral rehabilitation of criminals, as opposed to strict punitive justice. In the comics and in other adaptations, this is emphasized by the presence of Arkham Asylum. While many fans have incorrectly described the character as a rich kid who violently beats up criminals, Batman typically apprehends criminals and sends them to Arkham for rehabilitation. Batman is the only comic book superhero whose entire modus operandi is devoted to restorative, rehabilitative justice. The Tim Burton Batman movies are the only Batman films to not show or reference Arkham Asylum. But it would be this movie that will popularize and de-emphasize Batman as a symbol of criminal rehabilitation. Tim Burton's Batman is more aligned with retributive justice, a thing very much aligned with Ronald Reagan. In 1984, Ronald Reagan would sign the Comprehensive Crime Control Act. This bill would focus on more punitive methods of crime control, such as the death penalty and increased prison sentencing. It would also create barriers for things such as insanity pleas for criminal behavior. This aligns very much with the version of Batman that Tim Burton and Michael Keaton created. Tim Burton recontextualizes Batman from a caped crusader to a paramilitary creature of the night. Rather than being a hero built by physical prowess, Michael Keaton's Batman is an armor-plated, bulletproof boogeyman with vehicles that have more guns than the Terminator. Burton also redesigns Batman's look. Instead of blue and gray, this version of Batman is dressed in all black. This change is very much influenced by color psychology. The colors gray and blue are very much associated with calmness and stability, while black is associated with power, authority, and sadness. In spite of my critiques and observations about Keaton's Batman, I still think he was great in the role and rejuvenated the character, and is the perfect contrast to Jack Nicholson's Joker. While many people consider Heath Ledger the definitive live-action cinematic Joker, I think Jack Nicholson is the most important live-action Joker. I don't mean any disrespect to the late great Cesar Romero, or other actors who have portrayed him such as Jared Leto,
Why did you say that name?
Joaquin Phoenix, or even the underappreciated late Andrew Koenig in the 2004 short fan film Batman Dead End. But Jack Nicholson is the Joker. Born John Joseph Nicholson. Yeah, Jack ain't even his real fucking name. Jack Nicholson is considered one of the greatest actors of all time. And based on his body of work, it's hard to dispute that.
And the winner is Jack Nicholson and 1 Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
The winner is Jack Nicholson, Terms of Endearment.
While it might seem hard to believe now, Jack Nicholson wasn't Tim Burton's original choice for the Joker. While actors like Tim Curry, who would ironically be hired and then fired to voice the Joker in Batman the Animated Series, other actors like Ray Liotta and Willem Dafoe were also considered early on. But it would actually be John Glover who was Tim Burton's original choice to play the Joker, due to his resemblance to artist Brian Boland's drawings of the character in The Killing Joke. John Lithgow was another actor who was strongly considered to play the Joker, but he turned it down.
Well, did you also turn down the role of the Joker in Batman, John?
John!
Where did you find these things?
Someone, Morgan from Long Island,
No,
Texas.
I didn't exactly turn it down.
Okay.
I actually was put forward by the great casting director, Marion Doherty.
Right.
It's her choice to play the Joker. Took me to Tim Burton. I was working my ass off on Broadway in M. Butterfly at the time.
Yes.
And I just couldn't imagine going from that into a movie. Besides which, at that point, I thought, who is going to want to see a movie about Batman?
Another great call by you.
In fact, it would be Michael Biehn, aka Kyle Reese from Terminator, and John Lithgow, who were the final main two actors Tim Burton planned on casting as Batman and the Joker. Producers John Peters and Peter Gruber wanted a more bankable A-list actor, like Jack Nicholson. Nicholson was initially hesitant but signed on after learning that the studio wanted to hire Robin Williams.
I've always been fascinated at the roles that actors don't get. I know this might be a sore spot for you,
it's
but...
not. It's like, we'll mention some and then we'll talk.
Okay, well, the Batman, the Joker role.
Listen, Robbo, I'm real sorry about it. Maybe I'll send you a couple of T-shirts, smart boy. It happened that way. It went away, I guess. You know, I was interested, but somebody else went, I'm better than you and I'm bigger. So here you go.
It happens. Like everyone has those stories. Even Jack's been ripped off a couple of times.
Williams was never really a choice the studio wanted. They only wanted to use Robin Williams to get Jack Nicholson to sign on for the film. Because this Joker exists as the opposite to this Batman in every way, everything from Keaton's controversial casting affected Jack Nicholson in the opposite way. If Keaton was a controversial choice and cast against type, then Jack Nicholson was cast perfectly. The movie is built around the Joker and Jack Nicholson. If Keaton's Batman is an empty shell protagonist who lacks strong character motivations, then Jack Nicholson's Joker is a more fleshed out and traditional character with a very clear and present character arc. Much like Keaton's Batman, Jack Nicholson's Joker exists to legitimize the character and the movie for a mainstream audience. Much like Marlon Brando in Superman, Jack Nicholson as the Joker adds a cinematic street credibility to a movie that most people at the time underestimated. Jack Nicholson's Joker adds something else to the Batman mythology: heterosexuality. So before June 23, 1989, the perception of Batman was tied to campy, over-the-top, Silver Age comic book nonsense. In 1954, German-American psychiatrist Frederick Wertham would write a book called The Seduction of the Innocent. This book would claim that comic books were the primary cause of juvenile delinquency. The book would also claim that Batman's stories were psychologically homosexual. These claims would be reinforced not only in the comics, but in the campy Adam West TV show. The term camp as a mass media aesthetic is very much tied to homosexuality and queer subcultures. The relationship between Batman and the Joker, especially prior to the 1989 film, was very homoerotic. But adding Jack Nicholson, who at the time, even as a middle-aged man, was one of Hollywood's most well-known womanizers, adds interesting layers and subversion to the homoerotic subtext of these characters. Batman 89 is the first time the Joker is ever portrayed as a ladies' man. In the original script, Jack Napier, the man who will become the Joker, was a vain pretty boy mobster who was obsessed with his looks.
You look fine.
I didn't ask.
Being dropped in acid and being disfigured was actually the source of his insanity. In the original comics, the Joker is typically portrayed as very effeminate and possibly asexual. His only source of infatuation is with Batman. This movie changes that by having Batman and the Joker engaging in a competition for the affection of Vicky Vale. Vicky Vale is portrayed by Kim Basinger. Originally, Sean Young was cast in the role, but left the movie due to an injury and creative differences.
It wasn't Kim Basinger. Kim had to come flying at the last second.
Sean Young was there. She was there for 4 or 5 weeks of pre-production, and Sean wanted to go and practice her horse riding, but she fell off, and we were about a week away from shooting.
Falling off that horse was something that just kind of, I couldn't hang on. You know, I just couldn't hang on, and there's kind of a poetic symbolism about that. You know, it's like, in a way, I look back at that particular time in my life and I go, wow, I wish I'd been able to hang on to that horse. You know, I wish I'd been able to do that, because then the turning point in my particular career, I would have been able to stay on the film. I would have been in a big box office hit. I would have been able to go on to other big box office hits. I would have, you know, and then that kind of domino effect would have occurred in my career. So that was the turning point in my career where that didn't happen.
In the comics, Vicky Vale is a journalist in Gotham City and is very much the Batman equivalent to Superman's Lois Lane, but never managed to have the same mainstream significance. The character was created in 1948 during the development of the 1949 Batman and Robin film serials and was inspired by a young Marilyn Monroe. With the exception of Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman in Batman Returns, there has yet to be a Batman movie that understands how to write interesting women as love interests, and that trend starts here. This version of Vicky Vale is a basic damsel in distress. In fact, I think any beautiful actress over the age of 30 in the late 80s could have played the character. But I do think Kim Basinger added a classy, not too smart, not too dumb girl next door quality to Vicky Vale. Kim Basinger's Vicky Vale manages to be one of the most beautiful women in the entire film, while also being attainable and not high maintenance. Unlike 1978 Superman, or even this film's successor, Batman Begins, one of the weakest parts of the movie is the supporting cast. A supporting cast is typically used to enhance the character arc and development of the protagonist. But because Tim Burton created a Batman and a Bruce Wayne who is abnormally withdrawn and antisocial, and who doesn't have a clear character arc, he barely interacts with any of the supporting characters. Bruce Wayne never, not once, shares any scenes with Harvey Dent, who, in the comics, was one of his closest friends. Also, Batman and Commissioner Gordon don't have any type of camaraderie. Bruce Wayne does have decent chemistry with Alfred, played by the late Michael Gough, who, along with Pat Hingle as James Gordon, are the only two actors to appear in the pre-Christopher Nolan, pre-Matt Reeves Batman movies. In my opinion, Michael Gough is the very best live-action version of Alfred. Sorry, Michael Caine. While the movie is light on character building, it went hard in terms of advertising. Batman 89 is an interesting film because it's a film that changed the way movies are marketed. Batman was a pop culture merchandising extravaganza. while other nerd-adjacent movies like Star Wars and Superman had its share of promotion and marketing, Batman took it to the highest level. As I mentioned before, Batman is a very Reagan-era film. It will be the first superhero film driven by laissez-faire capitalism. Batman 89 would benefit from Reagan-era deregulation of the free market. Batman 89 shamelessly sold everything from cereal, coffee mugs, t-shirts, action figures. Hell, at opening night when you bought tickets to see the movie, you were given a pamphlet from the Warner Brothers catalog that sold more merchandise for the movie. Batman's impact on pop culture would find its way into other mediums. Without this film, we don't get the groundbreaking Batman the Animated Series, which means we don't get other shows like Superman the Animated Series, Batman Beyond, and Justice League Unlimited. Without this movie, we don't get other game-changing Batman movies like Batman Begins, The Dark Knight, and The Batman. Batman would also advance the superhero action figure industry, which, in the 80s, was losing ground due to the popularity of brands like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Batman would also produce one of the first successful superhero movie tie-in video games. This movie would also impact the comic book industry by being a major part of the speculator comic book collector boom of the late 80s and early 90s, which led to a massive surge of new comic book stores and collector shops. And of course, I can't forget about Prince's Batman album. Music is an important part of any film, and Prince's Batman album is proof of that. Prince's involvement with the film's soundtrack was an attempt from Warner Brothers to draw in a female audience and a black audience. The original concept for the album was a duet with Michael Jackson and Prince, with Michael Jackson singing from the perspective of Batman and Prince singing as the Joker. But Michael Jackson was unavailable. The Batman album would be produced in less than 2 months and would be a turning point in Prince's career. Prince's previous albums, Sign of the Times and Lovesexy, will be considered commercial disappointments by Prince's standards. Prince hadn't had a #1 hit song since Kiss in 1986, or a #1 album since Around the World in a Day in 1985. The Batman album would change that with the song Bat Dance, which would be one of the most popular songs of 1989. There would also be an unreleased rap version with Big Daddy Kane that was taken off the soundtrack because it was considered too urban by Warner Brothers.
Only real men will be able to stay alive, survive what's happening. Because in 89, Batman is strapping. So it is time to put the criminals away. But hey, even superheroes got to play. So pass the Vicky Vale of female so I can party. I want to bust that body.
Prince's Batman album would be a major influence on 90s movie soundtracks, with songs like Bryan Adams' Everything I Do from Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, Whitney Houston's I Will Always Love You from The Bodyguard, and Seal's Kiss from a Rose from Batman Forever, all being predecessors of Prince's Batman album. Along with Prince's music for the movie soundtrack, Danny Elfman's score is one of the most significant and iconic film scores of all time. Starting his career as a member of the new wave music group Oingo Boingo, Danny Elfman would change his style from synthpop to gothic orchestral for Batman. In my opinion, I think Danny Elfman's Batman score is the most definitive superhero film score of all time. Actually, second most definitive. So what else is there for me to say about Tim Burton's Batman? Well, on June 23rd, 1989 at 7:15, my father took his 9-year-old only son to see a movie that would spark his interest in the world of comics. Batman is the reason I love comic books and superheroes. It's also one of the reasons I wanted to work in the comic book and film industry, a dream that I never got to achieve. But I did at least get to transition into making pretty good YouTube videos. Batman 89 means the world to me. Is it Citizen Kane? No. And it doesn't need to be. In fact, I don't even fucking like Citizen Kane. But I do like Batman.